The PDF of Late War Leviathans from Battlefront was only ever a stopgap until the more comprehensive hardcover book became available. That book is due out in October, and Battlefront have let me have a look at an advanced copy. Join me as we see what's under the covers. Late War Leviathans is a post-war supplement for Flames of War, introducing post-war and prototype designs. You can add Leviathans directly into your Flames of War games, or there are new Leviathan rules to fight big battles, mainly utilising the post-war heavy designs. It's a full-colour hardcover book of over 130 pages, with guns and tanks for the US, British, Soviet and German forces. There are a mix of prototypes and paper panzers, plus more historically accurate Allied designs built in limited numbers or arriving too late to see action. The blurb on the back says, "Inside Leviathans you will find many of these weird and wonderful tanks and other weapons that just missed World War II. The book explores what new weapons and vehicles might have entered service if World War II in Europe had dragged on after May 1945. To make this work, Leviathans proposes not one but 4 possible alternative history scenarios, ranging from a re-elected Churchill or rogue Allied generals facing down the Soviet Union, through to a nationalist resurgence in post-surrender Germany. The book is Battlefront's usual high-quality production, with great graphics and well laid out information. There's plenty of maps, flavour text and formation diagrams, as well as individual unit stats for all the new Leviathans units. Let's get this out of the way right up front. This book isn't going to be for everyone. These paper panzer and fantasy units following alternative historical scenarios will appeal to some, but not die-hard historical players, and that's okay. My guess is the World of Tanks franchise has enabled Battlefront to produce kits for their miniatures game, where players love unusual or obscure designs. It makes sense that these expensive-to-produce plastic kits would make an appearance in Flames of War. Presenting this as a standalone book with an alternative history is probably the best approach. Players who want to can add Leviathans into their games, whereas others can stick to the more historically based lists. Some people have decried Battlefront's diversion down this alternative rabbit hole, but the company would have had to produce these World of Tanks designs anyway, and the money from these products will help pay for the Pacific and early war products historical players want to see. With that out of the way, let's dive in. The book starts with special rules for playing Leviathans games. Leviathans are worth plenty of points, and this section outlines how to play big games, up to 400 points. That way you can get plenty of the heavy tanks on the battlefield for a game, not just 1 or 2. There's a handy chart for calculating points for support units. In Leviathans games, the majority of your force must be heavies, with just 25% of points available for lighter units. That's going to give these forces a very unique feel on the table. There's also some notes about minefields, battle plans, and reserves. It gives a caution about choosing defend as a stance, as you may have to put the majority of your forces into deep reserve, something to keep in mind. You'll also be able to download a special Leviathans mission pack from the Flames of War website. Leviathan units are identified with a special marking on their formation diagrams, so you know what counts as a Leviathan or not. Plus there's a list of available units from existing Flames of War books that can also be used. This opening section of the book is rounded out with a briefing for each of the 4 alternative history scenarios. Then each of the 4 nations are explored: US, British, German and the Soviets. That includes special rules, a big Leviathans formation diagram with all the formations and support choices for that nation, and finishing up with painting and basing guides. This is a similar format to previous Battlefront books, and has the same high-quality layout and design. With the general outline of the book out of the way, let's look at the Leviathan's formations. That's what everyone's here for. Let's start with the Americans. The Leviathan's tank formations are the M26 Assault Pershing, T28 Assault Tank, T29 and T30 Heavy Tank, and the T34 Heavy Tank Companies. The M26 Pershing Tank Company also counts as a Leviathan's force, plus you can field an Easy 8 company of Shermans. An armoured rifle company is included as an infantry formation. There's plenty of standard US support choices too, mostly scout and artillery choices like M8 armoured cars and M7 Priest, but there's a sneaky little addition down under tank destroyers, the Jeep-mounted 105mm anti-tank platoon. This is a Jeep mounting the M27 recoilless rifle. While the M27 was considered a failure due to high weight and short effective range, it's a great weapon to mount on a Jeep. I'm really looking forward to seeing this. It might sound silly to be excited for a Jeep when we've got tons of heavy tanks in this release, but I am. There's two assault formations where you can mix the T28 assault tank and the M26 Pershing. Both of these give you a mix of the two types. The assault Pershing is an up-armoured version of the standard M26 Pershing, while the T28 is a specialist bunker buster. These formations are intended to break through enemy defensive lines. The remaining Leviathan's tank and heavy tank companies share a similar organisation, with a HQ and up to 3 platoons of heavy tanks, plus an 81mm mortar platoon and an assault gun platoon. Tank platoons can have up to 5 tanks each. This structure creates very mobile forces, with strong anti-tank elements as well as fire support, but lacks organic infantry. Let's look at the US Leviathan tanks. The M26 Pershing was just coming into service at the war's end. Some even saw limited service, better able to deal with Panthers and Tigers than a Sherman. The game sees these in widespread service, plus the T26 Super Pershing, but also in an up-armoured assault variant, as well as the M45 howitzer-armed assault gun. The T29 and T30 were prototype heavy designs. These took a modified Pershing chassis along with a heavy turret and a big gun. T29 has a 105mm high-velocity gun, while the T30 mounted a 155mm gun, one of the largest main guns ever fitted to a US tank. These get AT-19 in the game. These projects attempted to produce a design capable of dealing with the increasingly heavily armoured German tanks, but were only produced as prototypes. Leviathans gives you the chance to see what they might have done if they entered service in numbers. T-34 is essentially the same hull and turret design, but fitted with a 120mm gun. The T-53 L60 rifled gun gave better anti-tank performance than either the 105 or 155mm guns. While it performed well, this design was deemed too heavy to enter widespread service. T-28 was a turretless design, filling a 1943 requirement for a bunker-busting tank to breach the Siegfried Line. A super heavy design clocking in at 95 tons, T-28 spread that weight over 4 sets of 20-inch tracks, the outer pair of which could be removed for transport. The 105mm gun had excellent performance against concrete fortifications. I noticed that the assault companies let you mix and match M26 assault Pershings and T28s. The mix of turreted and turretless designs with the heavy guns should be an interesting force to play. While it's not a tank, let's round this off with the Jeep 105mm anti-tank platoon. This gives a unit with AT-16 combined with a 12-inch tactical move. Because recoilless weapons don't require heavy mounts, this type of weapon can be safely mounted on light vehicles. So your Leviathan armoured rifle formations get to field technicals to give them a powerful and mobile organic anti-tank punch. But they do come in at about 5 points each. Overall, the US formations have a significant array of new units. While all the tank formations have a similar structure, there's plenty of scope for choice with an interesting selection of new tank types. There should be something to please most US players. Plus, there's plenty of recognisable late war US equipment in support. British Leviathan forces get fewer new tanks, but there's strong diversity. There's 3 Leviathan armoured division formations fielding either Centurion, Charioteer or the A39 Tortoise, plus the Saracen Motor Company as an infantry option. It does look like there's a printing goof here. The Saracen and Tortoise formations look like they've been swapped over. There's still a reliance on mostly existing late war equipment for support and fewer overall Leviathans formations than the US, but there's some interesting and intriguing options. Some of the new vehicles and weapons stand out, like the Centurion, Charioteer and Tortoise armoured squadrons and the Saracen Motor Company, but others are a little harder to spot. For example, tucked down in the support choices are the Hornet guided weapons anti-tank troop and the 120mm BAT anti-tank platoon. These unobtrusive little options add significantly to the game, even introducing guided anti-tank weapons to Flames of War. Another fun addition is the Saladin armoured car. The British Army loved armoured cars, and Saladin continues this into the post-war era as an option replacing the Daimler troop. Other than that, there's plenty of existing late war options in support too. There's lots of 17-pounder guns on tracks with M10s and Archer. You can take plenty of flamethrowers with up to 2 Crocodile flame tank platoons. Flamethrowers definitely hold the opposing player's attention. The Leviathan's British formations only get 1 assault squadron option with the A39 Tortoise. You can mix in Churchills, but this just isn't as exciting as the US assault company's mix of T28 and assault Pershings. The Churchill's AT-10 75mm gun isn't going to really supplement the firepower of the Tortoise's AT-18 32-pounder guns here, but good against infantry. You do get Chaffies for reconnaissance and Crusader AA within the formation. The 2 British tank formations in the book are Centurion and Charioteer. The formations share the same basic structure, a HQ and up to 4 tank troops, plus a Chaffee Recce patrol and Crusader AA. Tank troops can take up to 4 tanks, fewer than the Americans and the Soviets. The Centurion formation lets you mix troops of Centurion Mark I and Mark III. Each individual troop contains just one type of Centurion, but your squadron can have a mix of troops of each type. This gives you access to both cheaper 17-pounder tanks as well as the added firepower of 20-pounder Centurions if you want it. Charioteer has its own separate formation. Interestingly, while this is marked as a Leviathan's formation on the British force diagram, it actually isn't. When we look at the Charioteer Armoured Squadron Company diagram, it isn't marked Leviathan, and a quick conversation with Battlefront has confirmed this. If you're fielding Charioteer, they must come from your non-Leviathan points allocation. Mainly fielded by Territorial Army Reserve units, Charioteer gives British players access to the AT-17 20-pounder gun at less than half the cost of Centurion. It's also nimble, with a tactical move of 12 inches or 30 centimetres. However, the drawback is paper-thin armour. The thin turret armour gives Charioteer a front armour of just 4, less than a Sherman or Cromwell. These things need to dash from cover to cover. If Charioteer tries to go toe-to-toe with anything else in this book, it's going to end badly. The British infantry formation introduces some fun options. The transport is Saracen, a 6-wheel APC introduced in 1952. And there's the 120mm BAT anti-tank platoon. Otherwise, the infantry and other support units are similar to their wartime counterparts. Let's talk about the British tanks. The A39 Tortoise was developed to address a similar requirement to the American T28, busting through enemy fortifications. It mounted a 94mm 32-pounder gun in a heavily armoured cast casemate hull. A39 spread its almost 80-ton weight over wide tracks. It was underpowered and slow, but this was not seen as a drawback for a tank designed for the assault role. Too late to fulfill its intended role, post-war testing showed the Tortoise to be reliable and an accurate gun platform, but it was just too slow and heavy. It never entered service. Centurion is a different matter. The A41 design was the culmination of Britain's steadily improving wartime tank designs. Although Centurion was too late to see active service, this tank went on to be the backbone of Britain's post-war tank fleet, and served with dozens of nations. The Mark I mounted the 17-pounder gun, while the Mark III variant mounted the more powerful 20-pounder. But budget constraints meant Centurion production numbers remained low until the outbreak of the Korean War. Charioteer owes its existence to Centurion's low production rate. 20-pounder gun production far outpaced Centurion production, so a new 20-pounder armed turret was fitted to existing Cromwell hulls. Charioteer had a good punch, AT-17 in the game, but was thinly armoured. It was only ever going to be an expedient design. FV603 Saracen is the APC version of the Alvis FV600 series of wheeled vehicles. Crew was a driver and commander, carrying up to 9 passengers in the troop compartment. Armament was a Browning 303 machine gun in a small turret on the roof. Saladin is the armoured car variant of this family. It's heavily armed, with a turret mounting a 76mm low-pressure gun. Saladin replaced both the Daimler and AEC armoured cars, capable of providing effective fire support in addition to fulfilling the traditional reconnaissance role. Hornet was a light, wheeled, anti-tank guided missile vehicle. Primarily designed to provide long-range anti-armour firepower to airborne units, Hornet was air-transportable and even air-droppable by parachute. It mounted 2 wire-guided Malkara ATGMs on a retractable boom arm on the bed of a truck chassis. Malkara was big, heavy, slow, and proved difficult to guide, but had a large and effective Hesh warhead. With AT-18 in the game, Malkara could make a bad day for anyone it managed to hit. BAT, or Battalion Anti-Tank, is a 120mm recoilless rifle. Recoilless rifles don't need heavy-duty mounts to absorb recoil, so can be a lightweight way to give infantry a hard-hitting but portable AT option. It has similar performance to Hornet, but at a shorter range. Can you tell I'm a fan of 1950s-era British vehicles and weapons? There are going to be a lot of all these kits on my Christmas list this year. So, the British get lots of options in Leviathans. There's fewer formations, but the British get a cool recoilless rifle and an ATGM. I'm not convinced the Tortoise-Churchill combination in the assault formation is as much fun as the US T28 assault Pershing pairing, but I'm looking forward to Charioteer. Germany is up next. I know German late war heavies are always popular, so I expect a few people are waiting to see this. German Leviathan formations are broken up into 3 groups: tank companies, tank hunters, and infantry. There's not a lot of surprises with the tanks, with Maus and E100 heavy tank companies, as well as the 8.8cm Panther company. Germany also loved heavy Panzerjägers, and we get the Jagdpanzer E100 and Skorpion tank hunter companies. The surprise to me was the infantry Katzchen Panzersturm company. I hadn't heard of the Katzchen, a fully tracked APC, before. I believe Katzchen is German for kitten. There don't seem to be any surprises in the formation support options. Germany was already well supplied with quality support units in late war, so plenty of familiar artillery, scout, AA and aircraft choices here. The various German tank company lists are similar structures, generally a HQ, up to 3 tank companies, AA and an infantry platoon. E100 and Maus heavy tank companies both give you the option to sub in Tiger or Tiger II for the 2nd and 3rd tank platoons. This can give you a mix of heavies in the formation. That's probably a good thing because Maus comes in at about 24 points each, while E100 is 26 points for the 15cm variant and 30 points each for the 12.8cm variant. That's a lot of points. It seems odd to find Tiger II cheap at 17.5 points each, and Tiger I is a bargain at just 12 points. Having tracked infantry as an organic option here is nice. More about them in a minute. The 8.8cm Panther Company follows the HQ in 3 tank platoon structure, with standard Panthers as the alternative tank for the 2nd and 3rd platoons. Interestingly, the infantry option in this company makes you drop one of the compulsory tank platoons to take it, but that makes a nice rounded force. Both Panther options here get the infrared special rule. There are plenty of German-specific night fighting special rules that can give you an edge. This new technology gives you an advantage other nations don't get. You can add one of the Uhu IR illumination half-tracks to your Panther platoons for just 1 point. In addition to the turreted E100, Leviathans gives you the Jagdpanzer E100. This uses the E100 hull, but with the rear set casemate mounting a 17cm gun. This thing's a monster with an AT of 25. That's enough to go through the front armour of 4 Shermans. The company formation takes up to 3 platoons and a HQ, with AA. There's no infantry or other options, except that you can sub in Skorpion tank hunters for the 2nd and 3rd platoons. But if you like Skorpions, there's a separate company list for those, which have Jagdpanthers and Panzer 470s as alternatives. The German infantry formation is the Katzchen Panzersturm Company. The infantry can either be the new Panzersturm or Panzergrenadier. Panzersturm infantry are armed with STG-44 assault rifles and transported in the Katzchen APC, a fully tracked successor to the venerable SDKFZ 251 half-track. I'd never heard of the Katzchen before. It's a fully tracked APC design with a front-mounted engine and well-sloped armour. Suspension is a set of overlapping road wheels. Only 2 prototypes were built before the project was cancelled and design efforts moved to a similar vehicle based on the Panzer 38T. Options include a longer-range, hard-hitting Panzerfaust option with an improved AT, plus an anti-tank missile option for the vehicles. This missile is the X7 Rotkappchen, or Little Red Riding Hood. It's a wire-guided missile with a range of 1,200 metres and was set to enter production in 1945. A few examples were even reportedly tested on the Eastern Front. You can add this to your Katzchen transports at plus 2 points each. Weighing in at nearly 200 tons, Maus was heavily armoured and armed with a 12.8cm gun. It even had a 7.5cm gun as a coax. But it was huge, cumbersome, and had a complex electrical drivetrain. The E-series of tanks was meant to create a range of vehicles that shared some parts and design commonality. E100 was the heavy tank version, but only existed as a partially completed prototype. Planned armament was either a 12.8 or 15cm gun. Jagdpanzer E100 was the tank hunter version, mounting a 17cm gun in a fixed casemate on the E100 chassis. In-game, the anti-tank for these German super heavies ranges from 18 up to 26, more than enough to deal with all Allied tanks. Putting similar firepower into a lighter vehicle is Skorpion. This tank hunter puts the 12.8cm gun in a small open turret on a light chassis, weighing in at under 40 tons. Good for ambush and shoot and scoot. There's a lot of fantasy tanks in the German formations, but I expect they'll be popular. German what-ifs are very attractive, as if German players needed even more heavy tank options. But I really want to build some E100s, just for fun. Players fielding Germans should try and leverage the IR capability, and the fully tracked infantry should work well. That leaves us with the Soviets. Soviet formations are very tank-heavy. The Guards tank formations have heavy tanks like the IS-3, IS-7 and T-10, along with a heavy SP artillery regiment. Standard tank formations have the T-44 and T-54 medium tanks, with a Hero BTR motor rifle battalion infantry formation. Support options include many standard Soviet units, with plenty of tube and rocket artillery, tank killers, aircraft and AA assets. However, the Russians get a guided missile option too, with the 3M6 Schmel Tank Killer Company. I know this better as the AT-1 Snapper wire-guided anti-tank missile. It was mounted on many vehicles and even helicopters, but in this case it's mounted facing rearwards on the bed of a GAZ-69 light truck. This combination was known as the 2P26, or more colloquially, the baby carriage. AT is only 11 in game, but it gives that punch at range. The Soviet heavy tank regiments are all structured as a HQ with up to 4 tank companies, with an accompanying infantry SMG company. Soviet tank companies can comprise up to 5 tanks. The T10 and IS-7 regiments are exclusively equipped with that type of tank, but the IS-3 formation gives you the option to swap in some late IS-2s. The Heavy SP Artillery Regiment is structured the same way, allowing a mix of ISU-130, 122 and 152 companies. The T44 and T54 battalion organisation is quite different to the heavy tank regiments. They have fewer tank companies, just 2 per battalion, but each company has up to 10 tanks. The T44 regiment lets you swap in some T34s, while the T54 regiment can have 1 company of T44s. The regiments have an AA platoon, choice of 76mm AT guns or the new B10 recoilless rifle for anti-tank support, and an infantry option that can be SMGs or a BTR-mounted motor rifle company. The BTR motor rifle troops are mounted in BTR 152s, wheeled, lightly armoured trucks. While the infantry are still DPMG teams, they have been issued with the RPG-1 anti-tank rocket. As well as a support choice for tank battalions, you can take these infantry as their own formation. This is a well-rounded formation that includes 3 motor rifle companies, an SMG company, a tank company, mortars, machine guns, armoured cars and AA. The 2 anti-tank companies can be either 76mm guns or the B10 recoilless rifles. The B10 is an 82mm weapon firing a heat warhead. Anti-tank performance isn't great, just AT-11 out to 20 centimetres, but a reasonable punch for a man-portable system. IS-3 caused a stir in 1945 at the Berlin Victory Parade and drove a lot of Western tank design post-war. Heavily protected with curved and sloped armour and armed with a 122mm gun. Development of the IS series continued, with the larger IS-6, later named T10, entering service. It was still armed with the 122mm gun and was the last of the IS series fielded. IS-7 was a prototype, even larger and more heavily armoured, with a 130mm main gun. In-game, this bumps the AT from 14 for the earlier tanks up to 18, good for dealing with the bigger Leviathans. ISU-130 mounts a gun with similar performance on an SP chassis as an assault gun. But while the IS series of heavies was the end of an era, the T44 and T54 were the future. T44 matched T34-85 for firepower, and despite better armour protection was actually lighter. T54 matched similar improvements with a bigger gun to start the move towards main battle tanks. Tanks that had adequate protection and firepower to perform all battlefield roles. The T-54's AT-15 in-game doesn't quite match the IS-7's firepower, but it's enough to get the job done at a fraction of the cost. So that's the Late War Leviathans hardcover book for Flames of War. It covers 4 nations with what-if post-war alternative vehicles and equipment, a weird mix of the real and the fantasy. There's 4 alternative histories, special rules for each nation, new units and formations, and painting and basing guides. All the things you'd expect from any other Flames of War book. But the game is an interesting oddity, adding a lot of developing technology into the game. And I don't mean the heavy tank prototypes and fantasy heavies. The most interesting inclusions for me involve much smaller units. This includes the introduction of anti-tank guided missiles and recoilless rifles to Flames of War. Most of the missiles are first-generation manually guided missiles, but they were a crucial first step on the road to the current ATGMs. Things like the 2P26 baby carriage look ridiculous to us now, but were groundbreaking at the time. And recoilless rifles played an important bridging role, being lightweight enough to be mounted on light vehicles or even man-portable. This gave infantry and airborne forces a mobile punch they'd previously lacked. But even the tanks give a flavour for what was happening at the time. The late 40s and early 50s were a flurry of armoured development as post-war lessons were absorbed, or even sometimes hilariously forgotten in the rush of innovation of new technologies. I did note that later vehicles like M103 and M48 for the Americans and Conqueror for the Brits aren't covered. It's interesting to speculate if that means more Leviathans later, or more likely that these are going to blend into Checkpoint Charlie and Team Yankee. World War II focused players might not welcome the more fantastical aspects of this post-war inclusion, and that's okay. But I have to admit I'm curious to try out the ATGMs and play with things like Charioteer. Leviathans has its place. What are you most excited for in Late War Leviathans? What nation do you want to field? Let us know in the comments. Thanks to Battlefront for providing the PDF of the book for us to take a look at. And thanks to you for watching. See you next time.